This is a block of chicken noodle soup. Well, actually it's a green screen, but I didn't want to take the block of chicken noodle soup out of my freezer. I prefer my food in block format because like every other functioning adult in their mid-20s now, I want to fulfill a Minecraft fantasy. This is just honestly a really convenient way for me to meal prep. I cook a lot of food for DnD nights, and whatever is like left over, what my friends don't ravenously devour, is left for me to freeze and then put in these super cube blocks. I got meats, I've got beans, I've got pasta, I've got soups. All of that I freeze and I can kind of eat it throughout the work weeks and like several weeks later if I want, because freezing is fantastic. What does this have to do with D&D? Just relax, I'm trying to get there. This channel is just really a excuse to make really stretched out metaphors about D&D using whatever I can. I used to be pretty bad about eating leftovers, especially after D&D nights. I put it in the fridge and then just be really unmotivated to eat it like the next day or the next work day, just because I've already had a bunch of it over the weekend. But with the help of some actual proper planning and the use of a really bonkers freezer inventory that I've started tracking, food waste in my house has gone down quite a bit. So despite the fact that I prepare in excess, I'm not wasting any energy, time, or food because I had properly planned. Even though I had prepped extra, I am not wasting anything or wasting any material. You see what I'm getting at? Transition! Yeah, if it wasn't obvious by the title, this video is actually just about the quote-unquote advice to not overprep in D&D. And in the same vein of a lot of D&D advice that I find online, I dislike it because how I see it is that it lacks a lot of nuance that is worth bringing to discussion. Like, what am I supposed to do with that advice? What qualifies as overprep? What quantifies underprep? It is so vague, it is useless to me. And look, I am all for running games with as minimal prep as possible. I pretty much run a lot of my home games with a few Dr. Peppers and a prayer. All hail our ginger lord! But in all seriousness, to illustrate the level of prep that I actually do on a weekly basis for my home games, one of my players, he came up to me and he admitted that he felt bad because every time he would need to get up to get water or, you know, grab food or go pee, he would like have to step behind my DM screen sometimes. Our table setup's a little bit weird. But he ended up admitting that when he did peek behind my screen, because, you know, curiosity got the best of him, and he looked at my screen and he was like, dude, it looks like you have nothing back there, which is true. I genuinely write very little for my home games. A lot of the, you know, quote unquote prep that I do is just kind of existing in my head. A lot of the prep that I do is actually throughout the work week. While I'm at work, I'm thinking about D&D, thinking about like what I'm gonna do. Or, you know, on the drive home, or if I'm driving long distances, or just in those 2 to 3 hours before the game where I'm actually, you know, just cooking, I start thinking about what I want to do for the day. What's actually behind my DM screen is just my laptop, which I use to kind of cue up music for the most part, and to take notes, but I don't really take notes mid-session. Most of the time I do it after the session if I remember to, and a fidget cube. So yes, I do technically prep, I just don't necessarily write it all down, so I can't necessarily pass it off to someone. I have a pretty decent mental map and like memory, and that's how I learned to get through a lot of life, is I never learned how to take notes properly, so I don't really write very often. If I remember like I'm, you know, using the restroom or something and I remember to write a note in Obsidian, I will, but 95% of my actual prep is 100% just existing in the dome here. I technically prep very little in comparison to a lot of other people. So if I were to tell people to not over prep like I do, it doesn't really mean anything, because how I prep is super tailored to how I exist and function. For example, I am playing in a game right now run by my roommate / one of my players' friends, whatever you want to call them, and she needs infinitely more prep than I do. She's not as comfortable just like, you know, rolling off the ball. She needs a lot more to go with it, and that's totally fine. People just prep and they play this game for all different kinds of reasons, and they enjoy it for different reasons as well. I can't just tell her to swig a Dr. Pepper and let the doctor flow through her and let that be enough to explain how to, you know, run a game of D&D. That doesn't help for anyone. She's the kind of person who has like full art for all her NPCs, you know, full backgrounds, their family lives, what's going on with them. I personally just can't do that. I pretty much just, if I find an NPC or I draw characters, if I find the design cool, I'll turn them into an NPC. Or NPCs that like I had to make up on the spot will eventually develop like full personalities, and then I'll make art for them. But I can't really ever do it from the get-go like that. It's too much for me. What's the point of all this context? Well, I think in the same way that you need to, know who you are listening to when you like watch a review, it's really important to know where your advice is coming from, or like how their world perspective is when you listen to advice. It's the same way that like a reviewer like Nakey Jakey is very different from someone like Dunkey. There might be some overlap, but for the most part, you can see which values people have, and you can see that diverge in certain, subjects. I wouldn't necessarily want to ask my friend who can't do horror movies on the recommendation for horror movies. With all that said, I don't really think that overprepping is a thing. Not necessarily that it doesn't exist, because of course I have over prepped and I have just made too much before and my players didn't get everything that I ever wanted to. But what I'm saying is that over prepping doesn't have to be a problem, as in you can take a problem or something, with inherent disadvantages and then flipping on its head and turning it into an advantage for yourself. The main problem that I can see with people saying like don't over prep is the fact that most people think that you are going to be wasting a lot of time if you prep too much, which I can understand. You could pour a lot of blood, sweat, piss, and tears into something that your players might not end up even getting to experience. Your players could end up just like skirting an entire arc somehow. They could somehow just skip over a large chunk of your plans. You could place a building that you're like, hey, I want you to check out that building, and your players might not want to do that. You know who you are. Whatever the reason is, players are very complicated creatures, and I guess they are their own people, which means they are not always going to interact with the world in the way that you have intended. So I can definitely understand that fear of feeling like you might be wasting your time if you prep too much. But the thing is, I think you're only ever wasting material if you are not being intentional about saving that material to begin with. The food that I prep only goes to waste if I end up throwing it out, if I don't eat it. I put in a little bit of extra effort so I can have an extra large portion, all my friends are satisfied, and I can still have a little bit left over for myself to freeze. And I will freeze it and I'll eat it throughout the week, but the point is I end up eating it. It doesn't get wasted, I eventually consume it at some point. I think having that same kind of philosophy with your own home game prep is really effective in making sure that you have enough, like you're prepping extra, so that your friends have enough, that they're engaged, they're happy, they're enjoying their time playing this game with you. And then you have a little bit extra that they probably won't get, because most likely you will make a little bit too much that your players won't be able to engage with. Because I have definitely gone onto like a rabbit hole of, I find this thing interesting, I make way too much content on it. I probably realistically prep maybe like 25 to like 50% more than I would actually need for a singular week of D&D. Most of my sessions, I would say, are like 50% of the prep that I actually, plan for that week. And then I would say like 25% of just genuine improv, the stuff I had to make up on the spot because someone threw me somewhere where I wasn't expecting. So what's the other 25%? That 25% is the stuff that I had prepped previously. It could be lore that I worked on. It could be an NPC that I wanted to introduce them to. It could be a particular fight that I just reskinned with different enemies. It is the stuff that I quote unquote froze. It's the stuff that I over prepared. It's the stuff that I made in excess. Whatever the hell my disgusting vile web of obsidian has, I'm going to use it at some point. Even if I put a tiny little note in somewhere that doesn't even matter, at some point my players will get to interact with it, either big or small. And as long as you kind of plan for it, you can kind of take whatever you have and whatever notes you have, or like it could be physical, whatever. If you're planning for it and you're cataloging it, you can kind of be like, this scene would be appropriate to have this kind of character, or this kind of fight, or this kind of NPC, or, this shopkeep, whatever. When you save a lot of your, prep, you're not ever going to use it exactly how you have it planned, which is kind of how D&D just works anyways. You're gambling a lot of the times. But in the same way that I prep meals, right? Let's say I make a taco bowl, right? I'm not freezing the entirety of the taco bowl. I'm, freezing the individual parts, the rice, beans, right? The meat, whatever. You separate that out, and that way, when you need it, you can slot in different pieces. Like I could slot in that rice with something else. If I wanted to eat that chicken with, one of my frozen pastas, I totally could. So let's say you had like an NPC that you really wanted to be in one of the like starter towns that the players got to, but they ended up skipping past that point. You could totally just take that character as an individual part instead of seeing it as the whole, as like a part of the city or whatever. You take him and you just slot him into wherever the players are currently. If they're in another town, you just change and be a little bit flexible with that character and be like, hey, he's actually in this town. He's not being implemented exactly how you had him envisioned, but your players are going to be none the wiser, and they're probably still going to love it because you had put time to prep that particular character to begin with. Essentially what I'm trying to get at here is that the only wasted prep is unused prep. if you're constantly kind of like prepping a little bit extra every single time, you're kind of guaranteeing that you'll always have the right tool in hand if, you ever like run out of ideas or you just need something to entertain your players in that moment. This is really great if you ever run into something like writer's block, like winter comes and, the ideas aren't really flowing. You have like a backlog of ideas that you can throw at your players. That way, you're not burning out yourself, your players still have a good time, win-win for everyone. I am keeping this a little bit vague because, again, like I stated in the beginning of the video, that advice kind of only applies so much to every single person. It's very much how you tailor it to yourself. For me, when I overprep, it means that I'm actually writing things down for once and kind of like putting it down onto paper and saving, whatever note cards that I have that don't get used up. I prep very little, and so when I do prep a little bit extra, I can very easily skim that off the top. Someone who preps a lot, maybe that just means taking like an NPC and being a little bit more flexible, or like a scene you have and being flexible with who's actually in there. And just switching those around. But I do think that it's useful to think about. Don't worry about over prepping. It's always better to be a little bit over prepared, I think, than under prepared if you're not someone who's very light on their feet. So just have a little bit extra. Always, have like a backup. This is like savings, try your best to have something in case of an emergency where you just don't have ideas or things aren't flowing. You can just throw something at the wall. Anyways, that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening to me yap again. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.